All right, so obviously the major conversation today, the Miami Heat are up 3-0. Florida Panthers, though, they are back home. We got sunrise tonight. The Panthers looking to take a 3-0 series lead, and we welcome aboard ESPN senior NHL writer Greg Wyshynski back on the show. Greg, thanks so much for joining us. Always love having you on the show. I'm so look, we're all so excited. It's so great because this is the 29th year of Florida Panther hockey. All right. And this stretch, because it's the first time in franchise history that they've made the postseason 3 years in a row, which is pathetic, but also really great. And so, because this is the first time they've ever had a stretch like this, this is this. Now, I've been a fan since day one. I have hockey in my blood. My family's from Montreal. Okay, but this is how you grab a fan base. This is how you grab a fan base for a generation, forever. And we've never had this down here before. So unfortunately, it's taken 3 decades. But like this stretch that the Panthers are on right now, Greg, is what's going to have that building packed on a nightly basis from here on out.
Yeah, but I'll go you one better. The way you build a fan base is with a star. And the Panthers have had a lot of things in their history. Roberto Luongo, Pavel Bure for a time. But they've never had a Matthew Tkachuk. They've never had somebody who's not even in his prime yet, that has the combination of skill and charisma and clutch play in the playoffs that Tkachuk has. And, part of the math on the trade for him in dealing away Jonathan Huberdeau and Mackenzie Weegar, there was a few things. One, they lucked out because Tkachuk wanted to play in South Florida, which, is an advantage that they had over other teams. He's not looking to play in, Winnipeg, right? So that's one advantage. But, they still had to ante up to get him. And the two things that they preached in making that trade and then signing him to the long-term contract were, one, we think that he gives us a better chance than Jonathan Huberdeau to win the playoffs. I think we can say that that's the case. The way he plays, when he scores, the leadership that he's shown, it's all things you're never getting from Jonathan Huberdeau, who's a great player, but not that kind of player. Mm-hmm. The other thing was they found him to be a more marketable player than Huberdeau, and a guy that you could put on the front of the building and attract new fans and be the face of the franchise. And they were right there too. I mean, in very short order, no disrespect to the job Sergei Bobrovsky's done in these playoffs, but it's Matthew Tkachuk's team. And they're getting farther in the playoffs than they have since the mid-90s because of him. And I think that he is the kind of presence and the kind of star that can bring as many fans to the building as winning does.
I know you wrote about this, you asked Matthew Tkachuk about his overtime game-winning celebrations these first 2 games, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, and it's amazing. So, like, he scored 3 overtime goals in the playoffs. He scored 1 against Boston and then 2, obviously, in the first 2 games of the series against Florida. And when he beat Boston, his reaction was to immediately skate to center ice and hug all of his teammates, as one does. At the end of the 4 overtime game in game 1, his reaction to scoring the game-winning goal was to literally turn around and start pointing to the exit with his glove and, like, sprinting off the ice. And his team followed him to go to the back and celebrate and take their skates off and be done with it. And as Coach Paul Maurice said, that kind of celebration in that moment is completely understandable. They're exhausted. So then they score in the first couple minutes of game 2's overtime. And he does it again. He points with his glove and he literally says, like, come on, boys. And they get off the ice. He called it his bus in 10 celebration, as in, like, the bus leaves in 10 minutes. The game 2 celebration, he said, was because they were so close to the exit of the rink when they scored that he just felt compelled to do it again. But it's kind of become like a trademark thing, man. It's, I scored the game-winning goal. Let's go. Let's get off the ice. Let's leave. Thieves of the night and get out of here. And it was delightful. It's one of the better goal celebrations I think that we've seen in a long time.
Greg, what is it like covering a 4 overtime game? You're in the building until 2 a.m. I mean, I could tell you, and everyone who has responded to me on Twitter or my friends sending me messages all had the same experience that I did watching the game here at home. It was a miserable experience. And my team won that miserable experience. And it was awful. And we haven't had that, like I said, we haven't been this far in the postseason in 27 years. So, and it was Uwe Krupp early in overtime 3 in game 4 of the Stanley Cup Finals 27 years ago.
Yep.
Okay. So we haven't had this marathon overtime game. And certainly I've never experienced it as an adult. I was 15 years old that time when it happened back then in 96. And it was not an enjoyable experience. What is it like when you're covering that game?
Well, first off, 2 o'clock is charitable. It was more like 3:30 by the time all said and done. And I'll say this too, like it's what makes the Stanley Cup playoffs so unique and the best postseason tournament in sports is that you never know when that's going to happen. You never know when you're going to be sitting there watching a game one and all of a sudden it morphs into the 6th longest playoff game in NHL history. And, there were some people that are like, well, this is why we should try to end these games earlier. But I'll say this, man, I mean, game 1 of Canes Panthers was not necessarily on the radar to kick off SportsCenter that night. And I was doing a SportsCenter hit at 2:30 in the morning from the rink because of what happened in that game. Covering it was really interesting because at some point they stopped putting coffee in the press room at the arena. So what you then have to do is try to find caffeine any way you can. The problem is they also lock the soda machine. So I kind of scavenged through all of the drawers near it and found the Mountain Dew that they put inside the soda machine. And someone's like, why would you drink it? It's going to be warm. I'm like, we're in an ice rink. Like, it's going to be at least a little cold. And so I took a bunch of cans of that. Felt like I was 15 again. Felt like I was going snowboarding. Extreme Mountain Dew life. But that kept me going a little bit. But it's a marathon. And again, like the thing about it is that there is a little bit of clarity when a game goes that long, because in other cases you're trying to figure out what the story angle is going to be. What happens if they lose in game 1 regulation? It could be 100 different stories. When it goes to the 6th longest game of all time, it's how they win and how do you recover? And those are the 2 stories that I wrote that night and pretty much wrote the next day too.
I don't know if you've noticed this or you've heard this, but I saw a little bit of chatter about this on social media, and then I started to think about it as well. So after every game, and I'm sure every team does this too, in the Panthers dressing room, excuse me, they have a game puck, and the guy who gets the game puck puts it on in the puzzle, and at the end, 16 of them, and the Panthers win the Stanley Cup. And I don't believe Sergei Bobrovsky has gotten a game puck yet. Is that a weird goalie superstition thing that's probably going on there?
I mean, possibly. I mean, they've talked about the idea that they don't even talk to him on game days and stuff because it's the groovies. And I don't think it's probably any level of disrespect or anything of that nature. But it's been remarkable to watch him. I mean, I thought he was okay against Boston. I thought that he was the reason they beat Toronto with the way he played in the first 2 games of that series in particular. I mean, and the Leafs had a lot of issues in that series, but getting goalied in the first 2 games, I think, is what really set them off into that spiral, a spiral that's now resulted in them nuking the entire management team of the franchise. But he's been brilliant so far. I mean, stopping 100 of 103 shots, out-dueling Freddie Anderson, then out-dueling Antti Ranta. Like due respect to Matthew Tkachuk and the heroics that he's had in these playoffs and how much he's felt like the MVP. But I mean, they're nowhere if it isn't Bob playing extraordinarily well in the last 2 rounds.
This Carolina team tonight, I mean, look, the building's going to be on fire. It's going to be an experience for the Panther fan like they've never had. It's going to be so great. What are we expecting tonight, Greg?
Well, it should also be a real Panthers building. I mean, I don't know how well Carolina really travels. Yeah. They certainly don't travel like Boston or Toronto. So, I mean, it could be a real moment to make that place a little bit more homogenous than it's been in previous rounds. The problem the Hurricanes have right now is that it's kind of they are who we thought they were type scenario, where at the beginning of the last offseason, their biggest issue was finding a way to score that goal in the playoffs that they weren't finding a way to score in a game 7, in a critical part of regulation, in overtime. And then they go out and they got Max Pacioretty from the Vegas Golden Knights. And then he gets hurt. And then Andrei Svechnikov, one of their best offensive players, he gets hurt. So now they're missing those two guys in the playoffs. And then Teuvo Teravainen, one of their best forwards, he gets hurt. He comes back. He's not himself in the first 2 games of the series. And so now the concerns that we had about Carolina are laid bare in these first 2 games against Florida. They can't score on a power play in the 4th overtime. They can't score in any of the other overtimes before the 4th overtime. They're out shooting Florida 17-1 in the first period in game 2. They can't score that second goal. And I talked to some of the Carolina players, and they're like, yeah, I mean, it's a totally different deal if we go up 2-0 that game. So we're really starting to see now that lack of a finisher in that lineup in a series where one goal can completely change the trajectory of some of these games, and where the opposing goaltender is playing as well as he is. So if you're asking me which series has the better chance of a rally, I think it's the West. I really do. I don't know if Carolina has enough to overcome what the Panthers are throwing at them right now, both with Bobrovsky playing as well as he is, and with these games being tight, and Florida having the guys to score big goals at big times, in the Hurricanes, despite having a really good offensive postseason leading up to this, lacking them.
Before I let you go here, Greg, give me some thoughts on the captain. You know, I was very critical of Sasha Barkov when the Panthers were down 3-1. I mean, look, I was very emotional. I was very angry at all of it, you know, and he's had a great series so far, these first 2 games. He has the goal that the whole league is talking about, right? Which tied the game in game 2. Give me some thoughts on what you've seen out of Barkov this series.
Yeah, I mean, you know, and Wayne Gretzky says it's one of the greatest moves he's ever seen in the Stanley Cup playoffs. I mean, I don't even know how. I mean, like, what level of like the ghost of Marlon Brando comes back and says that's the best male acting performance I've ever seen. Like, it's just like, how do you get better than that? That goal was brilliant. He's played really well. I think it's funny. You know, Kachuk's had the biggest goals in the series so far, but shift to shift, I think Duclair, Verhaeghe, and Barkov have been the most dangerous line, and that's against Jordan Staal, who's one of the best defensive centers in the league. The Carolina got the matchups they wanted, but that Verhaeghe Barkov line really, I think, made the most chaos in the first 2 games on the road. So he's playing great. It's all clicking right now for this team. It's kind of amazing. I mean, for God's sakes, like, when you win game 2 on the power play, less than 24 hours after Paul Maurice says the Carolina penalty kill is such a beast that we're not even trying to score. We're just trying to play 5-on-5 on the power play. And then they score one. I mean, everything's coming up Panthers right now, and Barkov's line's one of them.
I know you're out west now. You want to tell everybody they're going to be able to catch you? You're going to have a story, I guess, tomorrow leading into game 3 out there in Dallas?
Yeah, no, I mean, they kind of have us bouncing around a little bit to kind of get a flavor for all the series. And I kind of wish this one was a little bit more competitive than it is right now with Vegas up 2-0. But, you know, I'll be there for 2 and 3, for 3 and 4. Probably do some TV work. You can catch me on Daily Wager on ESPN2, our daily sports wagering show. But I do have a story on ESPN today on Brent Burns, who is in the Panthers series, obviously as a Hurricanes defenseman, who is probably one of the more fascinating athletes in all of sports. I mean, this is a guy with an extensive reptile collection. He was once bit by a cheetah. He carries around a gigantic backpack full of knives and coffee. Dude's a one-of-a-kind player, and I talked to a bunch of his teammates, current and former, and people that know him to kind of get a sense of who the hell this weirdo is.
Awesome. Greg, thanks so much for joining us again. I always appreciate it. Have fun with the rest of the postseason.
You got it. Thanks for having me.